Chair. I appreciate it. Thank you for holding this important hearing, and to both panels appearing today. We really appreciate it very much. I'd like to welcome all 5 of our FTC commissioners, I guess 3 virtually and 2 in person, in front of our subcommittee, where we can not only examine the legislation before us, but also conduct overdue oversight of the commission. Chair Khan, congratulations on your recent confirmation as commissioner and chair of the FTC. This is a very important agency, as you know, and I am eager to learn how you will continue leading on its important work, especially in the protection of our constituents from fraud and scams, and how you can enforce a national privacy standard we want to enact. It is critical we get the ball rolling on that effort. I'm also interested in learning how the FTC can assist with protecting Americans from ransomware and other cyber attacks. I recently introduced H.R. 4551, the Ransomware Act, which would amend the Safe Web Act to focus on such attacks. The FTC can play an important role in securing our nation from ransomware. So I hope today's conversation may assist in fine-tuning my legislation to best accomplish this goal. Given the majority scheduled this as an oversight hearing as well, I would be remiss if I did not inquire about recent changes at the FTC. Chair Khan, I understand that change comes when a new team is in charge, and we will have our policy differences here in D.C., but that should not stop you from working with your fellow commissioners in a collegial manner. So you must understand why I'm concerned when we hear reports of individuals inside the FTC being silenced and your other commissioners being shut out of the process. We must take these allegations extremely seriously. It's concerning the recent changes in FTC processes took place without acknowledging the consideration of all commissioners and of FTC experts, some of whom have lifetimes of experience within the subject matter. To those staff, I hope you're watching today, so you may know this commission cares. Again, this committee definitely cares about the FTC process remaining open and transparent, and that your voice and expertise play an important role. We will begin a process to review these allegations, and with that, I would like to announce for the FTC staff listening that if you have any issues, we have created a whistleblower email. It's ecgop.whistleblower@mailhouse.gov. Again, ecgop.whistleblower@mailhouse.gov. As you're aware, with other bills on the docket, Republican members of this committee introduced legislation to ensure guardrails are included in any FTC decision-making process. I'm glad to see these bills are on the docket, and I appreciate it, Madam Chair, that you placed them on the docket. Thanks for following through. They will bring much-needed transparency, in my opinion, require proper notice and input from key experts at the FTC, like from the Bureau of Economics, something I wish was included in H.R. 2668, the legislation that expands Section 13B. As I have said before, Republicans support providing the FTC with the tools they need to pursue bad actors and to sufficiently enforce privacy standards. So I ask that the Democratic proposals in front of us be considered in that context. I hope my Democratic colleagues' engagement on these issues will also mean seriously engaging on putting in place a national privacy standard. Madam Chair, thank you again for holding this hearing. We have a lot to get through today, so I wanted to be as brief as I could. I'm eager to learn how we, as the Committee of Jurisdiction, can bring much-needed transparency to the FTC and how the legislation before us may do just that. And I thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and the chairman now recognizes Mr. Pallone, Chairman.
Chair, senators had the opportunity to ask him whether he would commit to running the FTC in a bipartisan manner. He, of course, considering one of your colleagues is expected to be confirmed to another position, the FTC may soon be in a 2-2 split. And so it would be even more imperative that the FTC proceeds on a consensus bipartisan approach. Chair Khan, since the Senate did not have the opportunity to ask you, will you run the FTC? Again, will you commit to doing it in a bipartisan fashion where you will consult and coordinate with all commissioners and ensure they have the resources of the commission available to them on all pending business? Please answer yes or no.
Certainly, Congressman. I think this is a really fascinating moment for a new emerging bipartisan consensus, especially around some of the concerns relating to concentration of economic power in the digital markets, and I'm always keen to find areas of shared agreement with my colleagues.
Thank you. Our committee has worked extensively in a bipartisan manner to protect consumers from fraud and scams. Mr. Carter's Combating Pandemic Scams Act was enacted at the beginning of the year, thanks to all of our leadership here. Representative Blunt Rochester's Fraud and Scam Reduction Act, as well as Representative Kelly's Protecting Seniors from Emergency Scams Act, both cleared our chamber with bipartisan support this year. My bill, H.R. 2672, the FTC Reports Act, would require the FTC to report on fraud against our seniors. Commissioner Phillips, how important is the work the FTC staff does to protect Americans from scams?
Congressman, thank you for your question. The work we do to protect American consumers against frauds and scams is our bread and butter as an agency. There is no work that makes me feel better as a commissioner when we watch our ability to find bad guys who are taking money from American consumers, dipping into their life savings, and get that money back to them. So the work that you have done on the committee to provide funding and to provide tools for us to go after scam artists is critical, and I think that needs to continue at the agency.
Thank you. And Chair Khan, again, as you pursue other initiatives, will any staff and resources be shifted away from the fraud program, which is so essential in preventing bad actors from harming our constituents? That's the question, please.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? You're saying when should resources be shifted?
As you pursue other initiatives, will any staff and resources be shifted away from your fraud program, which is so essential in preventing bad actors from harming our constituents?
Well, of course, we're always limited by the appropriations bills when it comes to thinking through how we're delegating resources across the agency. In certain instances, I think there are exigent needs that can arise in certain aspects.
But you don't anticipate moving money from the fraud program, is that correct?
Not especially. I mean, I think overall we are trying to look through the prism of managerial efficiency and trying to understand how we can best use our resources, especially given some of the exigent circumstances, and so we'll be continuing to make those determinations.
I suggest that you not, because this is such a very important program. Commissioner Wilson, can you elaborate on why the FTC Reports Act would also prove beneficial to increasing much-needed transparency and the flow of information within the commission?
Thank you very much for the question, Ranking Member Bilirakis. As I explained in my opening remarks, there have been significant concerns regarding procedural irregularities and abnormalities in recent weeks. These are abnormalities that we did not experience under Republican Chair Joe Simons or under Democrat Acting Chair Rebecca Slaughter. We can agree to disagree. We can disagree without being disagreeable, but process matters. And so to the extent there are ongoing procedural irregularities at the Federal Trade Commission, I think that even more transparency will enable Congress to exercise its even more important oversight now regarding the actions of the agency.
Guess what?
For your patience. So, according to a paper published by the Regulatory Transparency Project, state and local data privacy laws run into constitutional problems in at least three ways. First, the Dormant Commerce Clause. Second, the First Amendment. And third, conflicts with existing federal law. The article goes on to say that policymakers should carefully consider consequences of a patchwork of state laws. So, first question for Mr. Default. Can you speak to this growing patchwork of state laws and how they may be impacting the Dormant Commerce Clause?
Thank you, Congressman Bilirakis. That's right. I think that the Dormant Commerce Clause really just sort of holds that even where Congress has not legislated, that there is an area of regulation or an area of government activity that's sort of reserved for the federal government rather than for the states. And what the courts usually look at is whether or not a state law unduly burdens interstate commerce or whether it discriminates against business or commercial activity that occurs in other states. And so in this context, what you would look at is whether or not the law enacted in California or let's say there's a privacy law enacted in Florida unreasonably discriminates against commerce that's occurring in other states. And so that is an open question, and I think it's going to be a question of growing importance as more and more states jump in. You've got a law in California that's been already amended. You've also got a law of general applicability, general privacy law now in Colorado and in Virginia. There's a close call also in Florida and Connecticut. And so more and more states are going to be legislating in the coming years. And so unless we have a single set of federal privacy requirements that preempt state laws while avoiding preempting necessarily laws that just deal with consumer protection generally, like many FTC acts. I don't think necessarily that's what we're looking for. But just to your point, that is going to be a question going forward, and it does leave open the question whether or not some of those state laws could run into that constitutional question.
Thank you very much. I know it's a real concern. Mr. Vladeck, do you believe multiple state laws are at risk of the Dormant Commerce Clause?
I do. I think it's a fair concern. I don't think we're quite there yet, given the absence of a federal law. The Dormant Commerce Clause really looks not just to the factors Mr. Default mentioned, but to the question about whether these acts are so different that compliance with multiple laws would be possible. I don't think we're there yet. I think Mr. Default made the point that as new states enact new laws that may be very different from the California law, yes, I think the possibility of a federal court invalidating state privacy laws will grow. And I think that's one of many good reasons why Congress ought to finally enact a comprehensive privacy and data security law.
Agreed. Mr. Default, next question. In your testimony, you referred to H.R. 4447, the 21st Century FTC Act, which would authorize the FTC to issue APA rulings and enable the Commission to seek civil penalties for first-time offenses of any provision of the FTC Act. I have very serious concerns about granting unchecked powers to the FTC, something some of my colleagues seems to agree with. What are the consequences that may arise as a result of passing this legislation? Specifically, I'm concerned about our honest small businesses. If you could elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
Congressman Bilirakis, the problem that we see with general APA rulemaking authority and the general ability to seek civil penalties for first-time offenses of unfair, deceptive acts or practices is just that the law is intentionally very broad and it's intentionally fairly ambiguous. What is an unfair or deceptive act or practice in X, Y, or Z case? Because the FTC has such broad jurisdiction, I think that's probably why Congress initially made the decision not to give the Commission first-time civil penalty offense authority. And what we don't want to see is a situation that invites innovations on new theories of liability along with civil penalty, which can have the effect of having I think, a chilling effect on innovation in the market, because now small businesses are wondering whether or not and to what extent they're going to be liable for up to $44,000 per violation per person civil penalties when they're considering going into something that is somewhat novel, because now they're sort of building that into their budgets, and that causes whether they have investors or just the company leadership as they're looking at their 18-month plan, setting aside a lot more money for compliance and legal liability, and probably paying more in business insurance, rather than looking at going into new markets or expanding and hiring new people.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I have introduced H.R. 2672, the FTC Reports Act. I'm going to submit my question for the record, but I'd like to hear from the, not right now, but if you could answer my questions, elaborate and give me your opinion on this particular bill. Again, FTC Reports Act, H.R. 2672, has to do with protecting our elders. And now you're back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Congresswoman Castor, you're recognized